Before we get started today, I want to give a special thanks to Hashtag Paid, our top sponsor this week. I want to say goodbye to influencers. I want to say hello to creators. You can get your consumers talking about your brand, buying your product with creator marketing. Find out why creator marketing works up to 4 times better for your customer acquisition dollars by signing up with Hashtag Paid. Go to hashtagpaid.com. Thanks very much. Hello and welcome to the D2C podcast. I'm Eric Dick along with co-host Kyle Guilfoyle. And today we are extremely lucky to be talking to a good friend of mine, Jesse Campbell, who is a designer and a founder of Partner, a design agency that specializes in brand, e-commerce, and digital product experiences. Jesse has nearly 15 years of experience in the industry. He has led projects for global brands and some of the top 100 Shopify stores. Today, we are going to be talking about e-commerce product experience specifically, as well as some interesting things about the cannabis industry and how to build trust in your products. Welcome to the D2C podcast. Jesse, how you doing?
Eric, Kyle, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm interested to this blockchain thing that you were mentioning a little bit. What happens when what does that mean for the resale market? When everything is blockchained, do you have the right to resell things? Because I know there's some companies that are trying to take that right away from you, right?
Right. Yeah. There's I've actually not thought much about that, but I think in my knowledge of how products on the blockchain actually works is about that big. But to my understanding, it's more of a traceability thing and not necessarily an ownership thing, or a rights thing. Yeah, it's more of a and the way that I've sort of perceived it coming to light is perhaps a product like a cannabis product that is coming from a single source that needs to be tracked either for reporting purposes, for legislation, or for compliance. And also for the good of the consumer who maybe wants to know that it was this specific lot that this came from, which means it has these specific qualities, whether it's terpenes or THC or CBD. And so being able to attach that to a singular place that you can go and visit virtually and see all of the information about that, and the path it took to get to my doorstep or into my hands is, I think, a pretty beneficial one. I know that there's a lot more to it in terms of, if you think about how that looks for, I don't know, a pair of pants, and where the materials are coming from, where it's assembled, what the origins of all of it are. I think that's, I haven't extrapolated it in my mind as much as it possibly can, but I know that it's an entire market. There are companies out there that there's one that's called Provenance that exists just to do that.
And again, well, so much of it is about the brand. And if your brand identity is one of radical transparency, right now, the blockchain is probably something that we're adding on as something that is a value signal that people but that's not to say that it won't become something a lot more profound. And right now, those are the edges you need in your brand to make people want to associate with you, right? So even if no one's really, I can't imagine someone is going to if they're getting stuff all the time, they're going to be checking again to be is it from this particular place or whatever. But at the same time, right now, it's a pretty valuable selling feature to be able to start.
Yeah, totally. I think it's kind of, there's this play of what does the consumer want and what do we have in terms of information? Some consumers, especially in the cannabis industry, are just I will buy it. I'm looking for something that's either inexpensive or is strong or is weak or is whatever it might be. And other users are very, whether it's because they have a medical condition that they're treating or something like that, they're very specific around what their requirements are, what they're looking to purchase. So being able to provide that is not necessarily oh, you want to buy some cannabis? Here's an encyclopedia about this product, which is a little bit heavy-handed, or can be, but with the right user experience, it sort of allows the user to sort of flip over the carton and see what the ingredients are, essentially.
Should we just spin this into a cannabis pot? Like we have so many cannabis people on our list. We have so many CBD people. We have people coming out of the woodworks all the time to want to work with Pilot House. And it's not an area that
Oh,
we
right.
transparently have a lot of experience in, you know,
Right.
marketing it, especially because it's so tricky. But it
Sure.
would be really interesting because I know that you're pretty intimately involved with some cannabis brands, right?
Just one in particular,
Yeah.
who is like they are a national medical cannabis provider that is sort of transitioning into the recreational space as Canadian legislation allows. They're sort of sitting right at the front line of like where the legality is. So as things open up, they're going to move into that.
And what's your playbook
But
for that? That's what I'm so interested in. Just because in the year that cannabis has been around in Canada, like when it first came out, it was just so personality-less. It was so like there's so many restrictions put on marketers and brand builders, I feel like in the Canadian market to make brands that stand out. So I'm interested, like, you know, with a medicinal brand where you have people, if correct me if I'm wrong, they're actually like that's a governmental sort of decision where they're like, I'm going to buy from this grower, right? Like that,
yeah.
it's people are kind of like locked into their relationships on the medicinal side a bit more, right?
A little bit, and it's mostly because I think the hardest part for the medical user is to, at least digitally speaking, to retrieve or to achieve a membership with a company that is a provider. They need to submit a bunch of paperwork and a bunch of documentation and agreements, and they need to get that prescription essentially from some healthcare provider. And so that's like a barrier to entry that, I mean, if you can imagine trying to purchase anything online and having to get a note from some third party in an office that you would need to physically go to, that's a pretty tall order to ask of any user to do all of this stuff just to be able to buy. But once, so if companies can lower that barrier and then create greater access to that membership, then they have sticky customers. Those customers are like, I mean, pardon the pun, they are sticky customers. And
Sticky icky.
yeah, exactly. And so once that customer is in there, it's unlikely that, I mean, so long as you're continuing to sort of evolve the offering and, maintain good customer support, your customers are going to be there, and they're going to be there forever because they have, lifelong ailments that they're possibly treating with cannabis. And that's just a place that they're going to go on a weekly or on a monthly basis. It's just going to be a regular thing.
Very cool. And then
Yeah.
what steps are you taking to actually, like, how do you make a brand? How do you launch a brand into the Canadian market to the consumer side of things?
I mean, we're fortunate to be working with a company that has an established relationship with a lot of medical users. They are in a position where they have those medical users already. So
Yep.
as cannabis was legalized, there was momentum there, which just means that they don't have to do a big brand reveal and a big sort of splash into the industry to make a dent. They're already there. But what that means in terms of servicing the industry is essentially being on top of like what the customer wants and continuing to make it easier and easier to gain access for those who need it. And there's like a handful of other things that are really important to this company and their medical users, but essentially it just is a matter of like looking at what people are looking for and making it easier for them to like find that product, because the odds are what I'm going to look for as a medical user might be something that's high CBD, low THC, because I don't like the experience, and something that my parents look for as a medical users is going to be completely different. They might be looking for more of an experience out of it or looking to treat different things. And this is all under the umbrella of medical use. There's also arguments on either side of the spectrum for recreational use as well, but that's a little bit more of a regulatory compliance thing that Canada is like slowly opening up, at least in terms of e-commerce.
I wonder how it's doing overall in Canada, because I remember it started off so slowly and so, but like, you know, I go in and there's a fair amount of people there every time. Like I imagine it's becoming, you know, it's a lot less dire than it was last year at this time.
Yes, a lot less. Wait, a lot less dire in what way?
Well, I just looks like the projections. Like I just feel like our launch was really, it was not that great. Like we, in terms of the numbers that a lot of these big Canadian growers were anticipating.
There was a fall from grace for sure. I think a lot of that fall from grace was because of maybe lack of preparation from the producers. I do know some of the like initial like roundabout numbers in terms of like some of the work that I've done with like the provincial on the provincial side with the BC cannabis stores when that launched, and when that switch flicked, people were like drowning that website with visits for a long time, and I can only imagine that it's a continued success. So there might not be a ton of people in the actual cannabis stores now, but I think the supply has maybe started to catch up with the demand a little bit. And I think there's also this interesting thing that I hadn't really put a lot of thought to until I kind of got into somehow like found myself servicing the industry a lot, is the transition of gray market to white market and what that actually looks like for producers, for providers, for anyone who has access. The regulatory and compliance side of things wasn't just it wasn't a flick of the switch saying, okay, now you can sell. There's a lot more process that has gone into, as you can imagine, the bureaucracy and taxation and et cetera, all of the like back end business stuff that has gone into the cannabis industry that I don't even fully understand or care to. But it wasn't just a flick of the switch. So the supply was there kind of probably secretly. But the supply from a regulatory standpoint from approved licensed providers just couldn't fit the demand. And so that's probably where that fall came from.
And we had such a great gray market, you know, like that, the gray market in Victoria in terms of like globally, it was maybe, you know, that's like, I think regulated industries are maybe, you know, easier because everyone kind of wants them, but I was blown away with how good the gray market experience was in Victoria. There was so many different places. So it's like, so I think that step, especially in a place like Victoria, had a lot to do with there being these other options that they didn't really crack down on right away.
Yeah. There was this like gray zone, you know, gray market, where it's like it's legalized and we're not gonna, you know, I mean, you were in the city as we were experiencing that. Every second storefront was a cannabis store. You couldn't walk a half a block without tripping over 2 sandwich boards to, you know, please come into my cannabis store. So, and you know, I think that's the bubble that was created that had to burst in order for it to actually become like a more sustainable, standardized industry.
Nice.
Especially one with so much white tape.
What would you say your specific, you know, like area of expertise is, like your zone of genius or whatever you want to call it?
Man, that's a hard one. I would say, I mean, I'm speaking with a lot of confidence around the cannabis industry because I've been working alongside it or with it for the last couple of years based on some of the projects that I've done. But I think the thinking that goes into solving the problems for that is really just the design thinking side of it. My company partner is a design agency, and we specialize in brand and e-commerce and digital products. And so having done some work with some of like larger Shopify, some of the like top 100 Shopify companies, and some like large national brands or international brands, there tends to be a lot of like, there's the surface side, there's the front end side that is like, how are we going to show the customer what they're buying or what they need to do here? And then there's a lot of the sort of behind the scenes thinking that sort of ties the front end and the back end. And by the back end, I mean the back end of the business, whether that's fulfillment, whether that's like really specialized shipping options, whether that's, dealing with all of the regulatory compliance of cannabis, and kind of merging those together. And so it's kind of this connective tissue that might be my best guess at where my genius lies, if I have any at all.
What part of your job is your favorite part? If you had to, like, if you could do all day on it, would it be like on logo design? Would it be on like what part of the design process is your favorite?
I'm not the greatest design producer. I tend to be pretty slow at it, actually. And the parts that I really enjoy, and the parts that I think I'm quite good at, are identifying where the gaps are between, say, design and development. I've lived in those gaps, and I'm pretty familiar with understanding what design and development needs, or from another perspective, what our design agency needs to provide for this business who has a weird hole in their service. Whether it's, we did a project earlier this year for a company who needed to ship their products. It was a national gelato brand. They wanted to do e-commerce in the summer, selling gelato to across Canada, which meant they need to get that gelato from A to B in a really short period of time. Their logistics team took care of a lot of that, but there was also this weird like shipping bubble that we needed to stick within. And so solving those sort of front end to back end problems, and from a user standpoint, I think is where I love to put my thinking, getting that experience of like putting the thinking cap on and coming up with some solutions for a company to somehow differentiate themselves is where I love to sit.
And there's so much value there.
Yeah, totally. And well, I'm curious. Differentiation is such a, it's obviously so important. What are some of the first questions you ask to get clear on how to differentiate a brand? I'm not sure if that's too broad of a question, but could you riff on that a little bit?
Can you rephrase that? Can you?
Yeah. So, so a brand knocks on your door and let's say they're a cannabis brand, and they're probably struggling to stand out in a sea of same or similar products. How would you go about diving into the best way said cannabis brand can differentiate themselves? And I'm not sure if it's possible, but be fun to try.
So whether it's a cannabis brand or any sort of any brand out there, I was putting some thought to this in terms of, we had started our notes here for this podcast that we're now just riffing and improvising, which I love. We started some notes early about trust and transparency, and I think if any e-commerce company is going to build a loyal follower base or a loyal customer base, it's going to be because there is trust, because those people trust the company just well enough to come back again and hopefully bring their friends or share it somehow. Or when someone asks where the t-shirt came from, they say you should also check it out. So there's a huge part of trust there. And I really think that brands have two stories to tell. One of them is a functional story that says, hey, we made this product. It does what it intends to do really well, and it'll show up at your doorstep if you order one. And so there's like that really functional thing that says it's a real product made by people and you can have one too. Then there's the emotional story that says we made this product for you because we understand what you want in a product like this and why you make purchases like this. And so it allows users to sort of opt in to a more to like a deeper sort of instinctual level of buying. And I think that's where you get, and the crossover of that, I think, is really important to identify for companies too. So for a very sort of like logical type product, I don't know, I'm thinking products that are more commoditized, you're going to need to tell that story that this is the best version of it. But for products that are more emotional purchases, you really need to sort of push the perceived value of what you're buying up. And that comes with brand building. Some of the questions that I have asked in brand building experiments or brand building workshops, and I really hope I get to ask more of these to more companies and bigger companies, but are a couple of like shortcut questions. Some of the things I like to think about for my own brand or others is things like, what would a pop-up look like for your company? What would a pop-up in the middle of a post-pandemic Times Square look like for your company? And that forces people the people I'm chatting with out of the bubble of like, my company lives online and it has a nice looking online store, and it forces them into thinking about like, well, what is the experience I would create there? Or another example here is like, what are some kind of out there or weird products that would also kind of fit into your product line if you had the opportunity to make them? A good example of this is Dyson's hair care products. They, to me, first glance, they're a vacuum company, but when they came out with their $400 or $500 blow dryer, it was all of a sudden this like, oh, that's brand moves right there. It's Tesla's blowtorch. It has nothing to do with the car. It's just it, and these are companies that are actually doing these, but just simply asking those questions and saying, what are these things, can elicit really interesting responses that show what the personality of the company is. It shows what the overall sort of values and positioning of the company is. So there's, I don't know, I think those kinds of questions can really elicit fun answers and fun explorations.
I love that idea of the pop-up in Times Square, because it's like your website is this thing that was built a couple of years ago, and maybe you've got sales pages on top of it or whatever. But like that, just to think of your brand as that, it's like you might have something really evolved to say that might not be what your website says anymore. And then that idea of just focusing it on that experience, that pop-up, and then letting that maybe flow back into your whole brand identity seems like super valuable.
Totally. It also allows people to think, again, outside the box of like the browser window or the phone or whatever it might be, into a like more personal, people are walking by, what am I showing them? What am I giving them? What kind of experience am I creating for them? And then you can say, okay, that's the experience because this, and therefore, what does that look like online? What does it look like on the phone? What does it look like on any piece of technology? And I mean, those are really beneficial. I think there's a lot of value to those from a brand building perspective. Yeah,
totally. I love the Dyson example too, because it's like we talk about on this podcast all the time about the idea of jobs to be done and how product lines can sort of expand by this idea of, what else does that person want to have done? The Dyson one is different because it's like their science is based on moving air. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily about like someone who vacuums also will love blow drying their hair. It's more just like the jobs that their technology can do. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, it tackles, that's sort of the functional story. That's more of a like, what can we do here? They already have the perceived value pushed up, so they know that anything that they launch, and the same goes with, Tesla's blowtorch or their ATV. The perceived value is there. I know that if I were to buy any one of those things, that there's going to be a weight to it, that there's going to be like, there's going to be a certain feel to it. Same with Dyson's hair blow dryer or whatever it might be. So all of a sudden you have this perceived value that's been pushed up, and you have the opportunity to just put things under that umbrella, so long as it actually informs more around like what your product does or what your company is capable of doing, what your brand is capable of doing.
Very cool. When it comes to this is another thing. Like, oh man, I love these brand conversations because of what I mentioned earlier about like how it is, it is kind of like there's something ethereal about it. It's hard to like, put it into practice. And so, when you say, trust and transparency are, really important to help differentiate a brand. I'm curious what some examples of things e-commerce companies are doing or have done that have have engendered trust in their audience so that they'll buy more of their stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think the first place that a lot of people go in the transparency and trust side of things is like it's really easy to leap to this conclusion of, oh, that means I need to be transparent around where my products are coming from. And we've seen companies do this really successfully. If we think about any company like Tom's or Madewell or Outdoor Voices or whoever those companies are, who are very transparent about what their factories look like, where their products are coming from, et cetera, et cetera. That's a really simple sort of leap to say transparency equals this. Supply chain is transparency, but it's like, and this is more of like a societal problem, and this could be like a bit of a rabbit hole here, so I won't go down it, but I'm just saying that if Amazon has shown us anything, it's that supply chain is really a nice to have at best, that like people will choose to, if they can save $2, they will save $2 if it's the same product here or there. So supply chain is a way to be transparent, but there's also trust building in transparency around, and this going back to the cannabis example, transparency in what the products are made of, so we have, and again, this is speaking from experience only with cannabis, and it can be applied to anything, like any consumable like wine or beer or any unique product or nuanced product. But being able to show the user that, well, this is a plant, it has these qualities because it is from this specific lot grown at this specific place. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it OG Kush. You can call it any product name that or any strain, but if you grow it down the road versus here, it's going to have different qualities. And so being transparent about what those qualities actually are, and this obviously requires like lab testing and stuff like that for products like cannabis, but being transparent about what actually goes into that product, so that the customer knows really not just that they're getting this bag of weed, but they're getting something that has been sort of put through the right process, and I'm able to learn as much about it as I possibly want to. So that's like being transparent about like what goes into a product. That's not necessarily just supply chain stuff, but like the in cannabis's example, chemical makeup. The other way to create transparency, or to sort of imbue this sense of like transparency or trust or whatever, is just being really generous with how products are shown. I love when I can, be on a shop and see not only what this shirt looks like on a human, but also how tall is that human, because I'm 6'6", and if that shirt is hitting like the belt line of a 6'1" person, I know that it's going to be at my belly button, and that's not going to really work for me. So transparency around that. Transparency means showing the shirt at 500% zoom, so I can almost feel what that material looks like. It might even mean having a video that shows someone walking around, so I can see how it moves, or I can see how it sort of drapes on a person as they're moving. And so all of this is sort of, I'm putting it under this umbrella of transparency, but it mostly just means creating an experience that feels like I'm there, that it feels like I'm brought in, and that there is less of a barrier between me and whatever I'm experiencing or whatever I'm trying to purchase or accomplish on this site.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it reminds me of that concept of, we're looking for a blue ocean or a green field where, we can differentiate ourselves. And, the idea that when content and product, meet one another in a powerful way, that's where your blue ocean can lie. And your first example there about weed and showing the the chemical makeup and the process that goes into it, really it reminds me of that classic example of Schlitz beer. The 1900 ad where they showed that their beer was made in like a, I don't know, their warehouse or whatever, like had filtered air or something, and every single brewery was doing the exact same thing, but they were the first ones to really own it and put it into their content and their advertising. And as a result, they they catapulted their sales. So yeah, and I think it's just such a juicy spot to find content ideas. Is just look at what goes into making your product and then share that. And so
Vanessa will love this. That is content strategy right there. That is looking at all of the stuff that you have and saying, how do we show, or what parts of it do we need to show the user? And then figuring out a good way to actually show that to the user, because it's important. And that can come from a design side, but honestly, that comes from this like higher level strategy side. What do we need to say, and how do we need to say it? Going back to this cannabis example, what do we need to say? What do the users care about? Well, they're medical users. They want to know that they're going to buy something that has this chemical makeup, and that specific chemical makeup is really only achieved once, one single time in one single lot. And so to give the users the ability to search for similar chemical makeups further down the line is a content choice. It's saying, these are the aspects of cannabis that are important to our user. How do we surface that? What is the strategy around, giving our users the access to, or the ability to sort of sort by or filter by, or otherwise discover products that are sort of fit under this same
and it's
chemical
choice.
makeup.
This is just a giving transparency and choice, giving people that ability to experience the product and experience the shopping of the product in all these different ways. We posted one of our first issues, a stat that Shopify put out about stores that were using AR VR product experiences. I think it was like 94% increase in conversion rates, something crazy.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like we're still in the very early days with all that stuff. I feel like very few stores are using that well.
Yeah, uptake is small. And I think that's because it's kind of still like novel and experimental. It's also likely pretty pricey to, if you have your product, you would need to get that modeled and textured properly. The technology is a little bit unknown. It's kind of like you're introducing another arm of design and technology into your design or development process. So your business knowledge needs to go up as well. So your overhead goes up. Oh, you're launching 3 products a month. Well, that's a lot of cost to get that modeled and put into an AR environment appropriately. So that, I think, is the bar there is going to lower and lower over time as more companies realize that you said 94% uptick. That might be worth it to, it might not be worth it for some, but it might be really worth it to those with like high ticket items. Or, I know that there's like, I think it's like Upcycle, something cycle. They do a really great job of their AR in their app or in their website. And so like furniture, bikes, bigger things that you need to actually step back and look at from across the room or walk around to actually fully experience. That's great. We've even seen, actually, there's this technology of you put this really like skin tight suit on. It has a bunch of dots, and then you take photos of yourself with your phone, and then it builds a 3D map of your body. And then that 3D map can actually be used to size you up for, I think it was sizing you up for a suit or for clothing. But if you can imagine like that as a service, then, clothing store X over here can actually use that service to say, hey, here's what this looks like on you.
That's
So there's
interesting. It's like a
there's
plugin,
all
like
of
an
these
API.
technologies that are like, we could create a mental map with yarn and pins all over the place here. But AR, VR, yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun when we get there. I think the uptake is slow, but as you said, super valuable.
I wanted you to talk a little bit more about, you brought up this brand that you talk about, the plight of being a 6'6" gentleman, and how that relates to clothes shopping, but what that sort of taught you about that experience and how valuable, how valuable that can be.
As you said, I'm 6'6", and then there was a moment a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago at this point, where I discovered a brand called Son of a Tailor. And there was just something in the back of my mind, so like that is like been prevalent for years and years, which is, who can I ask to just make me a t-shirt that is, it might be this favorite t-shirt of mine at home, but 2 inches longer here and 1 inch narrower here, or whatever it might be. As it's not just that I'm tall, I'm fairly, I'm a bit of a rail. So anything that's large or extra large can tend to be a little boxy. So this is like me as an individual human, and there are 7 billion of us. But what Son of a Tailor has done is allowed me, again, this goes back to our conversation about brand loyalty or customer loyalty. It allowed me to go onto their site and build my specific shirt. I can choose every dimension of this shirt, and then order a number of them. And this gets into tiered pricing. You order more, you get less, or you get them for less. But I built my perfect t-shirt. They sent me one, and then I had one round of like, okay, I can edit the size because it's e-commerce and we need to like work on this a little bit. And so I edited the size, and then I got this shirt like dialed in, and I got them, and they're a little more pricey than a standard t-shirt, not by a ton, but something that fits me, for me, something that's actually personalized. And I think you can actually even put a little monogram by the hip or something like that to really dial it in, but something that just fits me. Have all sorts of pocket options or neck options or sleeve length types and stuff like that. And I just remember experiencing that and being like, oh, that is the next stage for e-commerce. That is one of the next stages for e-commerce, being incredibly personalized and allowing users to not have to fit into this general mold of like, this is what a t-shirt generally looks like. I remember that being this like a bit of an aha moment for personalization, I guess.
And you may never buy another, like you'll never buy another t-shirt, or it'll be almost impossible for you to leave this brand now.
Yeah, well, I think going back to what we were talking about when we were speaking about like customer stickiness, it took me time to build that. It took me this like, they send the t-shirts, I think they're in Denmark or something like that. They send the t-shirt over, you try it on, you're like, okay, neck's a little wide, or this is a little short or whatever. And then you adjust your measurements and lock it in, and then order the rest of them. So now that I've gone through that process, I know what I would change about the next order. But I've gone through that process. I've actually spent the time there. So I'm invested, my time is invested. And that investment, if it was a difficult process, if it was a shitty looking website and the experience was really awful and I didn't really know what I was getting in the end, it would be, I probably wouldn't have spent that time, but it was actually a fun process. They made it really fun. And I will go back there because of it. And anytime I do buy a t-shirt, which is pretty frequently, Vanessa will definitely attest to that. I do think about them, like I could actually just buy this over there and it'll be exactly my fit. But that's my own Everest.
Did you make this site?
No, we did not.
Okay.
No, that's something I discovered and have just had big hearts in my eyes.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I think this site is like a masterclass in kind of what we've been talking about here, showing the specifics about your product, and also, what goes into the production. Right on it, they have, these little animated videos showing, the product being made. And it's really beautiful, wonderful user experience. So
yeah, it makes the user feel like they're buying something really premium. It's a t-shirt, but it's not just premium, and it's not just premium, it's for them. It's
totally
tailored for them. It's in their names.
Yeah, really. So worth checking out, sonofatailour.com. So before we wrap up, if I'm hearing correctly, your expertise really is at the crux of brand strategy and design, and bringing these together to obviously to bring business results to bear. And these are kind of things that are tricky to put your hand on. Design is tricky, brand is tricky. I'm really curious about what some of your favorite resources are, where you've learned them, where you've learned the most to actually action these things and make them a reality. Do you have any?
I'll try and keep it relevant to what we've been talking about already, because Partner, my company is it straddles e-commerce and digital products. So, and what I've found in designing both, or being part of the design process for both, is that they are sort of like converging right now. And something we didn't actually get a chance to talk about is like the infinite choice of e-commerce platforms that are out there right now. I think that there is so much overlap that is going to continue to happen between digital product and e-commerce. As we are designing for e-commerce, we'll tend to be maybe building a Shopify theme, or editing a Shopify theme, or working on how a customer is showing their products or featuring their products or getting their products, more discoverable, or whatever it might be. But a lot of the problems that we're solving there are coming from, are being resolved by product thinking, like digital product thinking. So creating user workflows for, if there's a coffee subscription service, well, what are the steps that go into that? And this is all like product type thinking. Going back to the son of a tailor example, that workflow of going from 0 to custom fit is the same sort of workflow as it's thought about in the same way as you would design any sort of onboarding for any digital product, like an iPhone product or a game or something like that. There's, jobs to be done by the user that allow them to get to a point where they are a sticky customer and they trust you, and they love you for taking them through this experience in such a meaningful way, or in such a personalized way. I think that's where like these two worlds are going to continue to collide or overlap. It's not actually a collision. It's more of a like an overlapping and convergence. In terms of some of the like, best experiences out there, or where I look for inspiration, that's kind of on a day-to-day basis. There's so much great work, and there are so many incredible agencies out there doing some really awesome thinking. It's all innovative in a way that attempts to thin the veil or lower the barrier to feel like I'm experiencing the product right in front of me on my screen, whether that is a small iPhone screen or a large computer monitor. Lowering the barrier there, or creating a thinner veil to experience that, is the big problem in e-commerce, in my opinion. AR tackles that. User workflow and experience tackles that. And also brand tackles that in terms of how they're messaging and the information that they're showing, and why they're showing up in that industry itself. Does that attempt to answer your question? Does that touch on the thing?
I think so, for sure. And I know I'm really keen on I'm about to record another intro. This is an interesting podcast. We'll redo the intro.
Sure.
We had one of our members not make it to this one, but I want to make sure we pick back up with her at a time that we can, and really bring her back into this discussion of the evolution of commerce platforms, this idea of headless commerce, which I think is really interesting. So we'll save that for next time. Jesse is a friend of mine, and I'm super happy to have had him on the D2C podcast. And
Thank you
yeah,
for
we'll do
having
it
me.
again soon. Yeah.
I'd love to be. I mean, I love these conversations. They're exploratory. I learn a lot by vocalizing some of this, and you guys have some really great questions because I need to dwell on a couple of those. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.